Jimmy Hyams joins us now. His appearance is brought to you by Varner Ford in Clinton. Just an incredible selection there and great prices. You know you'll be treated fairly. Jimmy, let's go ahead and jump right into it. As I got a text from you, Greg Sankey visited with the media on was it Monday evening, I believe, and I'm completely off the screen. And now that you've had a day to settle in, one of the things that we wanted to talk about actually had to do with roster management. You were talking about Meshack and Key saying they don't want to be employees but want 1 year NIL deals. Well, I want a lot of things, Jimmy, but I don't get a lot of things. What's your take on what they had to say?
Well, hold on. Before Jimmy jumps in, let's just start this, guy. For clarity, we're talking about Tennessee basketball has filled out their roster, and Jemai Meshack and who was the other guy you said that said they don't want to be contract players, they want 1 year deals? We'll let Jimmy jump in on that.
Tamari Key. Yeah.
Who?
Tamari Key, Lady Vols basketball player.
Oh, Tamari Key.
Tamari Key.
Okay.
Lady Vols.
Okay, so they both right. So Jemai Meshack and Tamari Key both don't want to be employees. They want 1 year deal. So yeah, Jimmy, jump in. Give your thoughts on that. Sorry.
Yeah, so they were here. Both of them are here for a leadership conference. It's put on by the SEC. They've done that for several years. Tennessee's the only program that had 2 student athletes represented here. So they don't want to be employees. And as Meshack said, in which I thought they should have realized before, they don't want to get taxed on their scholarship. They don't want to get taxed on cost of attendance. They don't want to get taxed on, if you stay eligible, you get about $8,000 a year extra, which is one of the lawsuits that was out there. So they don't want to get taxed on that money. It makes sense. Now, as far as the NIL deal, they prefer a 1 year deal because they want to negotiate every year. To which I found this out later, and I did not know this. At least 33%, maybe as many as 50% of Tennessee's football players have multi-year NIL deals. I didn't know that. That came from a source. It surprised me that many of them. So that makes me think that you would have fewer people enter the transfer portal if they have a multi-year deal. Otherwise, there would be a penalty against them for leaving. So, but that was a conversation I had with them about those 2 topics that would affect the student athlete.
Yeah, and I'd heard about that as well with the tax end of it. So it's probably why I jumped ahead a little bit. And I want to be really clear on something, Jim, that I'm not recruiting for Tennessee here, but if you hear about a player that gets in trouble because of taxes, it's not because he wasn't informed. They have been informed. They have seminars to go to. Now, I don't know that smaller schools have that or that all schools have that, but Jimmy, I mean, they are well supported. You shouldn't have a tax issue if you're paying attention. That's what I've been told. As a matter of fact, I've seen pictures of the little tax seminars that they had. I mean, isn't there enough support there where they should be able to handle that?
Yeah, and they have classes at UT. Actually, they have classes on NIL, and you get credit for taking those classes. They tell you all about it, the rewards, the pitfalls, all the different angles that are there. And it's a class that they instituted a couple of years ago, which I was even told that Kennedy Chandler a couple of years ago attended and used some of the knowledge he learned there to help him in the next couple of years. So they are very well. Here's the other thing they could get taxed on their employees. They could get taxed on their scholarship. So if you go to Vanderbilt, you make the scholarship value is $75,000, you're going to get taxed. They don't want that. So now on the flip side of that, I talked to an administrator here that said the only way we're going to get to resolve some of these revenue sharing issues, NIL deals, and some of this is to have collective bargaining. And he said the only way you can have collective bargaining is for these student athletes to be employees. Now, I'm not 100% in agreement with that. I think they can be contract laborers and not be employees. So I do think there's a way to get around that, although I'm not a legal expert. But I did think it was interesting that an official at the SEC told me if you want to go collective bargaining, they got to be employees. They don't want to be employees. So we're kind of at a difficult negotiating situation.
Caleb, I know you got something, but I'm going to jump in here and think back on those moments that I was taking calculus too, thinking I'm sure that this is going to help me out one day. And at least in this particular scenario, they don't want to pay taxes. I don't want Cooper to have to pay taxes of my money. But I will say this, at least you're learning something practical about life. I mean, you're learning maybe earlier than I did, but you're learning it. So good for you.
Yeah, Jimmy, and I want to real quick. Oh, sorry. Real quick, what was Tamari Key even doing down there? She's not even like at Tennessee anymore. She played her last game for the Lady Vols, didn't she?
She did. She was on the leadership council. And I think because of her experience, they wanted her back to share some of her knowledge. She was down here last year. You're right. She has completed her eligibility. And I guess, I don't know if she just master's or what. To be frank with you, I know that she's at least a fifth-year senior. She might have been a sixth-year senior because of the COVID year. So, yeah, I was a little bit surprised she was here, but I didn't really explore as to why. Sorry.
Interesting. Okay. Changing gears a little bit, scheduling was a topic, I believe, last time you were down there, and they kind of went with the Band-Aid sort of approach to fixing that. What do you think might happen with scheduling, and do you think that anything might happen this week? Is there a goal to hammer that out?
No, it will not be resolved this week. Greg Sankey said on Monday night that kind of on the back burner, that they will have very minimal discussions about scheduling. They're more in tune about trying to figure out the other obstacles in front of them, like revenue sharing, like roster management, those type things. So there's a lot of litigation out there that they've been discussing. Now, he did tackle the issue on the 8 versus 9 conference game schedule last night and shed a little bit more light on it than what we've heard. And what he said was, we want to see what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee does and their evaluation and their criteria of strength of schedule. He said, so if we find out that they penalize somebody because they're only playing 8 conference games versus 9, we need to be in tune to that. He also said that if you go to 9, he said that you could have a better inventory of games for your TV media partner. He said that you also would be able to play more rivalry games. If you stick to 8, you're going to miss on some rivalry type games. So he did shed light on that. But for them to watch and see what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is going to do versus an 8 or a 9 game schedule, I've not heard him say that. Now, here's my take on that. I don't think a conference should be automatically penalized if they play 8 conference games. And here's why. Look at Florida's conference schedule. They're playing Miami, they're playing Florida State, they're playing Central Florida, the nation. So why should they be penalized with an 8-game conference schedule? So I think it's a case-by-case.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Jimmy, we've lost your audio. Jimmy, we've lost your audio.
Yeah, your audio is breaking up just a little bit, Jim. We can get that back. Jimmy, you back with us?
You want me to reboot?
No, there you are.
No,
right
you're
there.
good.
You're perfect. You're perfect. This to me is interesting because I understand the point of roster limits because you're suddenly going to have to pay out these players maybe from the school. But I think one of the neat nostalgic aspects of college football, Jimmy, was the whole Rudy Rudiger, who was an absolutely terrible interview. You and I both know that from being on with him. But it was a really neat story that theoretically a guy could stand up in the student section and I'm going to go be a walk-on. Well, it sounds like that may go away altogether because they can't pay 500 walk-ons.
Josh Heupel on that issue yesterday, he said that he knows that the roster limitation is coming. The question is, how much? So, for example, a lot of schools in Tennessee, I think is included in this, have 120 people on their football roster. 35 of those are walk-ons. You're not going to see that anymore. I think the football coaches realize that, but I think they would at least like to have maybe 10 preferred walk-ons. So don't cap it at 85. Cap it at 95, 85 on scholarship, 10 preferred walk-ons. So at least you keep some walk-on program. And then a lot of, even with Chris Doering, the former Florida great receiver, he was a walk-on. He talked about what a special moment it was when Steve Spurrier gave him a scholarship and how his teammates rallied around him and cheered, and what a great moment it was. I think they're going to keep some walk-ons in football, but the days of having 120 on your roster, I think, are done.
But Caleb, can I jump in? One thing, if you make a limit, to me, that's limiting somebody's opportunity, which gets back to the whole argument that this flies in the face of the Constitution. See, and that is what they have lost repeatedly in Congress. So I get that all parties may come to the table, but I just wonder if one person can't stand up like Maurice Claret tried to do and say, no, that's not legal. Because it sounds like we're getting close to something, again, that doesn't feel legal to me.
Well, I
Jimmy,
think what
your
we're
thoughts?
looking at is why are they discussing this? It's a cost reduction situation. So when you do have walk-ons, you're still paying for them to eat at the training table and do these other things. They're still under your medical care. And if not for this revenue sharing and not for the fact they got to pay $0.7 billion in some back pay that goes back to 2016, they're trying to find out, how do we recoup some of the money that we're losing? The NCAA is cutting a certain percentage of dollars to these schools that they typically have distributed to them. So what do you do? Looking at, and this isn't just ball, they're looking at a lot of different sports. Now, it affects football more because football has more walk-ons than any other sport. The other sport that has the second most walk-ons typically is baseball. But in basketball, you have a couple of walk-ons. So what? Football, you got 35. Baseball, I don't know the exact number. It depends on how many scholarships you actually give, the scholarship money that you have. Now, in some instances, I think there will be some walk-ons and may get some NIL money, which is, as far as I know, legal. So we'll see where that goes. But this is all about the revenue sharing, the paying the $2.7 billion and trying to find some source of revenue. And while I'm mentioning that, I'll say this. Some people favor the 8-game SEC schedule versus 9, because to recoup some of that revenue, you play another home game against ETSU, MTSU, whatever, and that could generate $3 to $5 million over that weekend for your program. So that's another reason some favor going to 8, because they've got to find an additional revenue stream.
Yeah, it's a couple of quick things, Jimmy. Is the walk-on change? This isn't as colossal as it was in the 90s when you really started to see walk-on limits, because I mean there were already, I looked at history. That's kind of what people look at the downfall of Nebraska football. It wasn't them joining the Big 12 and they got limited on the number of walk-ons they could actually start to use because of Big 12 rules during that time. It's not as colossal as that type of change was in the 90s for walk-ons, is it?
I don't remember what the cut was in the 90s, Caleb. What was it?
Well, Nebraska, there was no limit when Nebraska was in the Big 8. So they had they went like 250 deep one year on their roster. And then when they joined the Big 12, they could only have like 130 total players.
Yeah, and Jimmy, there was one other thing that I was going to throw out there. So yeah, I'll give you something. I'll give you something else that might kind of blow you away too. I know at Tennessee right now, there is a former coach, and I don't mind to tell you in between you and me, but that is trying to put together basically, I don't know, WFL, walk on for life, I guess, because He's trying to provide financial assistance for some of these guys that are borderline players. Seriously, one of them got on the field and you would know. And I've been told that he's likely not even really truly considered against the scholarship limitations. I mean, we could get into so many things about how do you legislate this. I don't even know how you would determine what a walk-on, a preferred walk-on, or a scholarship player is anymore if he's getting money from some former coach who still wants to be involved with the program.
I guess that's dicey, but the whole deal is, instead of them saying scholarship, they just put a cap. You can have 95 football players on your roster, period, whether they're scholarship or walk-ons, or that number may be 85. They may just say that's the limit, and right now you can have 85 on scholarship, but it's not known yet what they're going to negotiate as far as those numbers. I will say this: I will be surprised if the football roster exceeds 95. Which theoretically is 85 on scholarship and 10 walk-ons. So I don't think it's going to go greater than that. I think some football coaches would accept that. Now, I did run into one person in the media that thinks that even 85 is way too many. He said, look at NFL rosters. They've got, 53 on the active roster and about 15 on the practice squad. But the huge difference is if you have a bunch of injuries in the NFL, you just go sign somebody off of a waiver wire. You go pick up somebody that it said they retired, and now you bring them back. You don't have that availability in college. If in college you have injuries to 5 wide receivers, how do you overcome that? Well, I guess maybe you move a defensive back to receiver, but it's a different ball game comparing the NFL to college. But I thought it was interesting that a media member thought that even having 85 was way too many for a college football roster.